and then after a couple of these meetings, it became clear that actually these guys didn't want us to open. It was fine for retail. Well, fine for retail, fine for pubs, because they win votes.
Yeah,
that actually presses buttons for the British public. So this is a big learning for us as an industry.
Good morning, everyone. This week's video cast is with Paul Thandi CBE, Chief Executive of the National Exhibition Centre. And Paul, you were the person who first became heavily involved in government when you offered the NEC free of charge for the Nightingales. And you've also, through 2021, been the representative of the exhibition industry at the heart of government on the core DCMS committee. Now, tell us when you first realised that this crisis had hit and you were going to be involved in that way.
I mean, it's hi Phil, hi everybody. It's quite a big question, that. I think it was the 26th of March 2020 when we actually said to all the staff, right, you've got to go home, and shut down the business. And bearing in mind, I was the first guy to ever shut this business. So that weighed on me, and I kind of thought I need to talk to staff. So the next week we did a video broadcast to staff, and I was very honest about, look, I just don't know when this is going to end. And at the end of it, actually, it brought a tear to my eye. And it was then when it kind of struck me, whilst a lot of people out there were thinking, okay, we'll be back in the office in September, I kind of thought, I'm not sure, because that isn't what I was hearing from people we knew in China, people we knew in the Far East and places like that. So we quickly triaged the business, and our business, like many other private equity owned businesses, we utilize our cash very heavily. And so cash was the thing that we needed to do. And bearing in mind, we have an operation in the exhibition industry, in the convention industry, in the arenas industry, but also a food services business, a hospitality business, a real estate business, a data business, etc. And so we quickly went about talking to our supplier base about, look, guys, you've got to help us out, because we really can't afford to pay you, because if we do, we'll have to turn the lights off, full stop. That's it, us done. And the reality of that situation, whilst deaths were going through the roof at this time, no one really knew. And so we managed to triage our business, work with our suppliers, talk to staff. Honestly, I was doing a video every week, twice a week sometimes, and just being perfectly honest about, look, I just don't know. I don't have it. And through the work that we've done as a business, and me as an individual, with governments on various things about planning, about regeneration, and the bigger sort of high-speed 2 sort of stuff for years and years, we then got invited into a load of government committees, and I was on a call with Boris on a couple of Sundays after he made those announcements, which if I'm honest, it was what it was. But I think it was more of a PR thing than it was anything else. But through that period, we also set up with Jeremy down at Excel, John at Manchester, Nigel at EC&O, Peter Duthie over in Glasgow. We set up this CEO call about, look, we've got to talk to each other and help each other out. And then it came to light that Jeremy got a call from the NHS saying, look, we need to talk to you. And he spoke to me and he said, have you had a call yet? I said, actually, I haven't. And ironically, that afternoon, I got a call from the NHS. And I can't remember if it was from the NHS, the MOD, government, or the local guys. But quickly, we were then around a table discussing how to put a hospital together. And then it was a case of managing my board, the shareholders, to say, look, guys, we need to do this, do the right thing here. We've got to do it for nothing. And once we did all that, and by then furlough had kicked in, so a lot of our staff were on furlough, we did it for nothing. And the thing that bugs me to this day, and it will bug me forever, is there was a lot of professional firms, a lot of suppliers in the NHS that actually were making out like Billio. And they were running around our site telling us how much money they were making. And I got my IT guys who are on 24/7, trying to keep this thing going and taking on board everything. I got my operations team guiding everything, putting the thing together. And they're saying to me, hang on a minute, boss, we're working 12, 16 hours a day. These guys are making out like video, and we've done it for nothing. So that was a difficult situation. Also, negotiations with government, NHS England, and then the local guys just overcomplicated things. So it was during that period I thought, I honestly cannot say when this is going to end. And if you, a lot of you remember, a lot of people were out cycling, a lot of people were running, and the weather was beautiful. And so everyone looked as if they'd spent 5 weeks in Saint-Tropez, whilst us and a load of other people were working 17 hours a day trying to not only keep the lights on in our business, but also trying to get these things in Nightingale together. I worked with a chap called David Ross when we were successful in Birmingham's bid to host the Commonwealth Games.
This is the Carphone Warehouse guy.
Yeah, so David set up Carphone Warehouse with Dunstan, and then consequently sold it and has gone on and done various other things and built other businesses. So extremely successful guy and driven guy. And he got asked by Boris Johnson to put a task force together. Bearing in mind, myself, Jeremy, everyone else was on about 10 different task forces, some with DCMS, some with BIS. And the biggest thing about it that struck me about those other task forces were you kind of worked out that actually all they're doing is just listening to you, but they're not actually doing anything about it. And so when people are fake listening as such, you kind of work it out. And to be fair to them, and I had a couple of calls with Oliver Dowden and some others, you could tell that they were as frustrated as we were because their hands were tied, because everything was being controlled by number 10. Everything was controlled by, at the time, Boris, Gove, and the chap who's gone now, who became the Satan that everyone hated, his spad. Oh God, what is his name?
Dominic Cummings.
Indeed, DC, the man that needed to drive 200 miles for an eye test. And so that, that was who was controlling everything. And then you've got the complete farce over the PPE equipment for the NHS staff. And I've got a lot of family in the NHS, so I kind of know front end and front hand how bad it actually was. And I also know from a lot of suppliers who contacted us and saying, can you help us talk to government, how farcical some of those contracts were. So you got all that on in the background, then you've got all these government committees you sit on, you've got Nightingale, plus you're trying to keep your business alive. And then you get invited to sit on the Events Research Board, which was a strategic board to sit above the Events Research Programme. And so I kind of said, Dave, let me think about it. And I knew that it's a leadership role that I need to perform because I'm going to be representing the exhibition industry, conference industry, the live music industry, the arenas business. So it's, I've got to do it. But in my experience with sitting on these things, sometimes working with government, they start with the answer. And you're kind of there to tick the boxes so that when they talk about it publicly, because everything but everything is about votes. Everything, particularly this administration, it's not about anything else. And so if you think the background at this time was they were talking about opening retail, they were talking about opening pubs, and John Van Tam was on the board. So we had our first board meeting and I said, okay, because I thought, let's see how it goes. So I thought I better not upset anybody. But by the end of the board meeting, I kind of thought, I can't let this lie. My job is to represent our sector. And therefore, and I said this to John Van Tam, can you explain to me why 125,000 people in 3 weeks' time can go to Westfield, unchecked, only wearing a mask, nothing else, and yet we are still limited in a building that is 5 times the size of Westfield to 30 people. Please explain that to me. And he couldn't say anything. And John Van Tam's not a guy that's used to being challenged. And so I could see the other people on there, the scientists, the sort of, when people look at you on Zoom and Teams, you can see them thinking, oh God, you can't ask questions like that. But anyway, he just said, look, it's a policy decision. And then after a couple of these meetings, it became clear that actually these guys didn't want us to open. It was fine for retail. Well, fine for retail,
Yeah.
fine for pubs, because they win votes.
Yeah.
That actually presses buttons for the British public. So this is a big learning for us as an industry.
Paul, in our weekly conversations, you'd been very complimentary about a lot of the people on the ERP, saying there were some very, very good people on board. In other words, what kind of things were you getting from the ERP which we thought were really, really valuable for us?
We can't just go, that's wrong, that's wrong.
Yeah.
We've got to nuance our message that means votes. Now, whether that's economics or whatever it actually is,
Yeah.
that's what became clear to me, that unless we start talking in their language at these meetings, we're just not going to get anywhere. And so, I mean, the meetings were fascinating about the depth and the analysis that they're actually doing on the heating and ventilation systems. And all of you know, we've been through some CBE guidelines that were issued in December 2020 about fresh air and how much fresh air we got to get in per person, per square meter, etc. And I can bore everyone rigid about that if you want to know about it. But it was quite challenging in the fact that sometimes you sat in these meetings representing your sector. And as you know, Phil, I then set up a communications channel with the top sort of 4 or 5 people in the exhibition industry, you being one of them, of course, and Mark and some other people. Mark at Hive.
Yeah, and Lisa.
Lisa at Clarion. Mark at UBM. So, and Doug as well. So we set that up. I had the same thing for the arenas business as well, with Phil Bowdry, who runs Live Nation, and Greg Harmsley on the Trade Association. So those were my communications channels. And whilst I was sat talking to you guys, what I was so conscious of, I didn't want you to feel as negative as I felt when I was in these other board meetings with these guys, because I thought, if I tell them that actually, guys, they just don't want us to open. There's no rhyme, there's no reason, there's no science. They just don't want us to open because actually we don't matter.
Yeah.
And so after a while, I got through to a chap called Alex Hickman, who's one of Boris's advisors, and said and Alex is an ex-business guy, so he kind of knows the score, and said, Alex, you're completely unfair. You've now opened theatres, you've opened everyone. And where you talk about football stadiums even opening, they don't need to open. They've got billions in sports rights. We're dying. We're bleeding out slowly. And this is what we represent, whether it's 70 billion or 7 billion, whatever the number is. Alex got it straight away, and he kind of changed it. If you remember, from October, I think it was, we could then start hosting up to about 1,000.
Yeah.
And Alex was the guy that changed that. And so the ERP, whilst they did some great work, I must admit, you kind of sat there and think the scientists are only, their term of actually what's safe environment is everything remains shut and lockdown is the way forward. And so that was what I was faced with. And then knowing that I had to try and communicate some modicum of a decent positive message to you guys, so we never gave up hope. But knowing that actually, at some point in time, common sense will prevail. And so
going back to the Nightingales, was the NEC Nightingale ever used?
No.
I think Jeremy had a small number of patients, didn't he, in Excel?
And if you ask Jeremy why those patients were there, he'll tell you, because on the same day those patients came there were cameras outside.
Yeah, he did tell me that. Yeah. So it was never actually used. And you and I had a long conversation at the time where you said it's all very well and everything's set up and the beds are there and the waste and the electrics and everything's there, but you couldn't actually see where they were going to get 20,000 staff from. Where were they going to get 20,000 doctors and nurses from?
That was the biggest problem nationally, to set these things up, and you can't fault them, because if people were dying, and what we didn't want was what was going on in Italy, of people dying in hallways and taxis on the way to, the world was falling apart. So you can't blame this administration for setting them up, but I just think the size and the money spent, and I even spoke to the NHS chief execs, and there's about 15 of them, which sums up the organisation itself. But spoke to a few of them and just said, where are you going to get the staff? You haven't got enough staff in hospitals.
Oh.
Your frontline staff are being killed, are dying anyway because they haven't got the right PPE. So who are you going to put here? And at the time, anyone dying of COVID in those early months up until about September, the majority of those people dying wasn't all to do with breathing difficulty, it was organ failure.
Yeah.
And organ failure you can't treat, you have to be in surgery. So these things were, anyway, they were set up and they were the right thing to do at the very beginning, but it quickly became clear that actually you haven't thought through how you're going to get people there, who's going to staff it and all that. Or maybe they did and never told us.
Oliver Dowden's now been replaced by Nadine Dorries, of course. I mean, you've obviously been working with Oliver Dowden. Is Nadine Dorries famous for two posh boys who don't know the price of a pint of milk? Is that going to be a plus for us, or?
I think we need to move to biz, because I think we're misunderstood by being in DC.
Yeah.
So, you know, we are closer to business. As trade shows, whether we're consumer or not, we still bring in a hell of a lot of economic regeneration to whichever region the exhibition centre, conference centre or the arena is. So I think we need to move there. Whether Nadine and Liz Truss, I'm not, you know, it's a difficult situation, Phil, because whoever it is, you know, you got to play with the cards that are dealt and you have to work with them.
Yeah.
So I'm not about to condemn them, nor am I about to say I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. But, you know, we have to work with these people to get our industry to the top table. And unless we can nuance or eloquent our message, it means we matter to vote the voting public. I don't think we're going to get heard, because we can carry on going about 70 billion. It just doesn't move the dial for these guys. What moves the dial is actually we're going to affect the next local election in this area because you haven't done this for us, you haven't done that for us.
Yeah, I know you feel very strongly about this, and you're of course more exposed than anybody because you spend more time with government than anybody else in our industry. It's been a discussion for years, but you know, we've seen it in action, haven't we, in the last 2 years? What do we actually do? What can we do that we have not done in the last 18 months?
Right. One, we need to pick a small team. Small teams work faster. That's a fact. So the problem is we've got too many people involved and we have to canvass too many people to get their opinion and then get agreement across too big a platform. So we all need to agree between us all, who the small team, who's going to be in it. Whatever that team come up with, we all stand by, and that team need to come up with an argument that covers our economic impact, covers the regeneration that we do, but actually links it to votes across the country, actually makes it talk to a language that these guys understand and respect, which is about their re-election next time round. And because of what we do, we can help them.
So are you saying a small group of people with organisers, with suppliers, obviously with venues, clearly?
Yeah, I mean, you know, to be honest, I wouldn't pick a team more than 5 people, because otherwise you've just got too many opinions, too many things you've got to try and for the message, and then we've got to pay someone who does this day in, day out, properly, you know, pay big bucks as industries, and we all have to pay into that to get our message heard. And it's all about lobbying, it's about this, that, and the other. But there is one bit of reassurance that I would ask everyone to reflect on about when we say, oh, well, we're not taken seriously. Nobody was. If you look at logistics industry, they weren't. No one listened to them. If you look at the aviation industry, look at where they are. So we weren't just brushed aside, but by sitting in the ERP, I kind of thought, my God, these guys just have no idea what we do. They have no idea about our air handling, our security, our health and safety, our processes, and the size of our spaces.
Yeah.
So it's an education piece, but it's also about tying it back to, it's the golden rules of selling, isn't it? What matters to your audience, you've got to hit those things.
Yeah.
And what matters to this audience is all about votes. So I think that's something we've got to do. But where are we now? We're operating as large venues. We are making sure that we operate with COVID status checks, and that's important. What we are also doing is measuring the outbreaks on our campuses. So Jeremy's doing it, I'm doing it, Nigel's doing it, John's doing it, Phil's doing it, Sean's doing it up in Manchester as well. So, and that way we've got a body of evidence when it comes to it to start to say, well, actually, look, we introduced the heating and ventilation stuff that you asked us to under the CBE guidelines. These are the number of outbreaks. This is the process we've got. We've got the all secure standard. You've signed it off. So start taking us seriously as an industry, because actually we're a bunch of professionals who know how to run these things. Because beside airports, we are deemed as national infrastructure.
How do we start? I mean, this conversation, let's get a small group of 5, 6, 7, whatever people, has been in the air for quite a long time. Who starts it? How does it start? Who begins it?
I think that's up to the AEO, because ultimately it's you guys. You guys need to pick a few people from yourselves, from the venue side, from the supplier side. You've got to have a cabal of the willing as well.
Yeah,
people have got to put in the time and sit around a table and debate it, argue it, and then we've got to agree, right, this is the agency we're going to use. And we're not talking about second tier or third tier. We've got to go straight to the top boys in comms, particularly lobbying, and employ them and speak to them and run a beauty parade and say, right, this is what we need to do. How would you go about doing it? See what they all say, pick the best bits, go with one. Simple thing. You've done it a million times with all the investment banks you've used. But, and we all do it with everything. We go out to, pick the best bits from each and go with one who you want to work with. And that's what we've got to do. And it will take time.
And it will also take a lot of money.
It will take a considerable amount of money. I
mean, more money than our associations have got at the moment. And that does signify a really big commitment. It's a commitment from organisers, from venues in particular, saying, okay,
we're commitment from everybody. But what myself and others won't put up with is, because of the size of you got, well, actually, I've been bleeding cash and I've made 500 people redundant. So be realistic about how much money you're going to ask for me. I can't just go out and raise capital. I'm a private, we took on more debt. I've got more debt than I ever wanted. So, there's capital constraints at each business, and each business has got a particular place, but we can sign up to some form of commitment.
Yeah, and organisers like my companies have also taken on additional debt. Certainly not desperate amounts of debt, but taken on additional debt, of course.
All of us have, just to survive. And so I think whilst this doesn't come at the right time, we've got to debate it and agree, maybe once the industry starts to get back at its feet and we see cash flows, because the big thing for the venue side is deferred cash. We've been paid for some of the stuff that's going on already, and we've used it to try and get through those dark days. So we're not actually generating cash as we speak today. So we need to get through that, unwind the deferred cash model. And I think that's going to take us to the end of 22, 23 as an industry to get back on our feet and really run. Because the majority of shows we're seeing are 50, 60, 70% of the size as they were. The great thing is the visitor numbers are coming through, the quality is coming through, the visitor density is good. We could do with some more consumer patience in terms of some of the hospitality issues that we all face.
Yes.
But it is what it is. We will get there, and I think things will rapidly change, barring the energy crisis, the truck driver crisis, and the supply chain crisis.
In my experience at the NEC over the last 2-3 weeks, a number of shows has been very, very positive. I mean, first of all, the protocols outside that you're running have been very, very good, very, very reassuring, but also just the size of the audience. I mean, there's no sense at all that people are staying away, if I can put it like that. I'm not saying that the audiences are exactly the same as they were in 2019, though in some cases they're higher, of course. But the sense is people want to come back, they're going to come back, just like they've come back to football matches. And the worry is that a lot of people might have had is, hold on, will this have a long-term effect on people's approach to trade shows? Based on what I've seen at the NEC and Olympia over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I'm very, very reassured and indeed very, very optimistic.
Look, I was as optimistic as you, and I'm more than happy to say that publicly. Sadly, you and I have both gone back quite a long time when people said the internet's going to kill us. Then they said this is going to kill us, hybrid's going to kill us. You cannot replace what we do. Humans need other human interaction. It's a fact of life. Lockdown proved it. Look at how many divorces are taking place, and look at how many people have come out of it and thought, I can't wait to get back to the office. I can't wait to do. You need to see other people. You need to see a supplier. You need to see your customers. You need to touch and feel the live product. It's what we do. You need to be educated in your industry, go to conferences about it. Tonight, we've got the first night, 3 nights sold out of Genesis. I know that is going to be a humdinger. I don't even have to think about it. It will be a humdinger because it's the first time. And we had m.i.c.e last night, absolutely brilliant. Audience were great. F&B numbers were great, thank God. We've done the boxing, and the boxing can be a challenging audience for compliance on COVID. They were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So people want to go and get what they used to do before back again. Look at festivals. Festivals had 10% no-show. People with tickets but just didn't come. But the people there still spent more than if they'd had 100% of the people turn up, because people haven't been able to live their life. And the biggest one, when you get told you can't go out, you can't do this, you cannot do this, and you've been used to living your life like that, it's quite a difficult thing mentally to handle, because you kind of think, I've worked hard enough in life to achieve some sort of freedom, and actually you haven't got it because you're controlled. And that's so these things about going to the pub with your mates, going to a restaurant, going to a show, going to an exhibition, going to a conference, getting back your way and enriching your industry, enriching your brain about what subject you love, your work, etc. They're so important in the fabric of humanity in society.
I don't want to get into pivot to digital at this point, because that's another 30-minute discussion, and a really interesting and entertaining discussion.
Well, I'm completely relaxed about digital. Digital is a complementary thing, as the internet was, etc., etc. Hybrid conferences will never be purely hybrid. We will have conferences that we have, but we'll have a section of it for people that can't get there, etc., etc. But it will never replace it. It will never replace it. But exhibitions, you need to be there. You need to feel part of your industry. I mean, we've been saying for years to all of our customers, you've got to get the show back into the show. You've got to put the exhibitor party back on. You've got to have, because people work in industries and it becomes so lonely because the internet has made everything such a commodity that you need to feel part of something. You need a purpose. And these shows running throughout the calendar in various industries throughout the world give those industries a purpose and a highlight and a crescendo to their marketing, so they can actually move product.
Okay, to finish, the last 18 months where you have been the industry's interface with the government, really, if you learned one thing that you didn't know or you didn't realize before, what is it?
I've learned many things about. You've got to talk their language. You've got to understand what matters to them, and then try and wrap.
You come back to votes here.
Wrap whatever it is you're trying to achieve to that.
Yeah.
Because without that, I just don't. We can talk about our economic impact. We can talk about. We've got to get our exhibitors to start to talk about what we do as well. You run some large shows. You've got to get some of your large companies that exhibit with you, you've got to get them to start talking about us, talking to government, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the logistics side of the business, we're a big chunk to the logistics industry about moving our stuff about. So we've got to be a bit cleverer about our message and how much we matter to UK PLC and how much that matters to tax generation, wealth generation that builds schools, hospitals, etc., and will help a future government get re-elected. Okay,
Paul Thandi, CBE, thank you very much. Have a good day. Let's hope tonight's show goes really, really well. And let's hope tomorrow's goes well as well.